The economy is often compared to a delicate machine, but right now, that machine is sputtering, overheating, and dangerously close to breaking down. Inflation is no longer a distant headline. It's the rising cost of your groceries, your fuel, and your rent. It's the shrinking value of every dollar in your pocket. Across the globe, debt levels have reached historic highs, and central banks are playing a dangerous game, trying to balance interest rates against the threat of recession. For decades, people have assumed the financial system would self-correct, that markets would recover like they always have. But when the foundation is this fragile, even a small shock can send cracks through the entire structure. Banks, the institutions we're told are safe, have already shown signs of strain. We've seen sudden collapses, government bailouts, and whispers of liquidity shortages. Ordinary people aren't supposed to worry about such things. Until the ATM stops working, the stock market plunges, and pensions suddenly aren't as secure as promised. Economic collapse doesn't always arrive with a single catastrophic event. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, day by day, until the moment you realize your savings by half as much as they did a year ago. The triggers are everywhere. A major corporation defaults on its debt, shaking investor confidence. A foreign nation dumps U.S. bonds, rattling global markets. A cyber attack disrupts financial transactions, freezing accounts and spreading panic. These aren't abstract scenarios. They've all happened before, and each time the recovery took years. The difference now is that they could happen together, compounding the damage and accelerating the downfall. When the economy falters, the ripple effects are brutal. Jobs vanish, prices soar, and desperation grows. Families who once felt stable begin to cut corners, then cut essentials. Businesses close, communities struggle, and the social fabric starts to tear. This is how economic instability feeds into the larger perfect storm. When people can't afford food, fuel, or housing, unrest follows. And here's the truth few will admit. In a collapse, the government can't save everyone. Safety nets can only stretch so far before they snap. That's why preparation isn't optional. It's survival. Diversifying your income streams, reducing debt, keeping emergency cash, and storing essential goods aren't paranoid moves. They're the logical response to a system on the edge. We are no longer in a time when economic trouble is a distant possibility. The conditions for a financial breakdown are already in motion. Whether it strikes in weeks, months, or years, the wise will treat this not as a prediction to debate, but as a warning to act on, because in the perfect storm, the unprepared will be swept away first. Global instability is no longer something happening over there. Conflicts, territorial disputes, and shifting alliances are redrawing the world map, and the consequences are rippling across every border. Wars that once seemed isolated now send shockwaves through supply chains, energy markets, and economies. Every tank that rolls across a border, every missile that strikes a city, carries with it a cost that isn't just measured in destruction. It's measured in the price of fuel at your pump, the availability of food on your shelves, and the security of your own nation's future. We're living in an age where superpowers are no longer willing to quietly coexist. The competition for dominance in trade, technology, and military power is intensifying. Rival nations are stockpiling weapons, testing advanced missile systems, and building strategic alliances that bypass traditional Western influence. This isn't just saber-rattling. It's the slow but steady dismantling of the global balance that has existed since the end of the Second World War. The danger lies not just in open conflict, but in proxy wars, cyber warfare, and covert operations that destabilize entire regions without a single soldier setting foot on enemy soil. These indirect confrontations are harder to predict, harder to trace, and far more dangerous for civilians who may never see the battlefield yet still suffer the fallout. For example, a cyber attack on a rival nation's infrastructure could knock out financial systems or energy grids, creating chaos for millions in an instant. Global instability also fuels refugee crises, forcing millions from their homes. These waves of displacement strain neighboring countries, overwhelm resources, and create political tension that often boils over into unrest. Meanwhile, nations already struggling with economic challenges find themselves shouldering humanitarian burdens they cannot afford. Trade routes are another flashpoint. Control over shipping lanes, ports, and critical waterways has become a high-stakes game. Disruptions, whether from conflict, piracy, or political blockades, can halt the flow of essential goods like grain, fuel, and medicine. The world is more interconnected than ever, but that also means a single geopolitical shock can ripple through every continent within days. For the average person, the danger is in assuming these conflicts are too far away to matter. History shows that wars have a way of expanding, of pulling in allies, and of forcing nations into positions they didn't expect to take. Even without direct involvement, sanctions, trade restrictions, and energy shortages can change daily life in ways that feel sudden, but have been building for months or years. Global instability is one of the fiercest winds in the perfect storm. It's unpredictable, fast, moving, and often invisible until it's too late. The smart response is to understand that foreign conflicts are no longer distant. They are the tremors that warn of the earthquake to come. Economic volatility has become the silent engine driving uncertainty across the globe. Stock markets swing wildly in response to political unrest, inflation reports, and even social media rumors. What once took months or years to shift can now change overnight with a single tweet, a sudden interest rate hike, or a breaking headline about a financial institution collapsing. This fragility isn't just a problem for investors. It's a problem for everyone who relies on stable prices for food, fuel, housing, and everyday necessities. Inflation has been eating away at purchasing power in a way not seen in decades. Wages struggle to keep up, leaving families forced to make tough decisions: pay the bills or stock the pantry, fix the car or put money aside for emergencies. When central banks try to slow inflation by raising interest rates, it can crush small businesses, increase unemployment, and make debt repayment nearly impossible for ordinary people. This tug-of-war between fighting inflation and avoiding a recession is a dangerous balancing act, and one wrong move can push entire economies into crisis. The global supply chain remains fragile after years of strain. Pandemic disruptions revealed how dangerously dependent the world is on a handful of manufacturing hubs. A single factory closure or shipping delay can set off a chain reaction that leads to empty shelves, higher prices, and panic buying. Layer in trade disputes, tariffs, and resource scarcity, and the world is teetering on the edge of shortages that could last not weeks, but months or years. Debt levels are another ticking time bomb. Governments, corporations, and households are drowning in loans and credit obligations. Many countries are borrowing heavily to keep their economies afloat, but every borrowed dollar adds weight to a financial system already under stress. History shows us that when debt becomes unsustainable, defaults happen, and when nations default, the shock can be felt everywhere, from pension funds to grocery store prices. In times of economic volatility, the gap between the wealthy and the struggling widens rapidly. Those with assets in real estate, gold, or diversified investments can weather storms far better than those living paycheck to paycheck. This widening inequality breeds social tension, protests, and political instability, which only deepens the volatility. The real danger is that economic collapse rarely announces itself with a single catastrophic event. Instead, it creeps in slowly, through rising prices, shrinking savings, layoffs, and failing businesses, until one day, people realize they're living in a different world entirely. In a perfect storm scenario, economic volatility doesn't just accompany other crises, it magnifies them, turning every setback into a potential breaking point for individuals, communities, and nations alike. Geopolitical tensions are like dry tinder scattered across the world. One spark can set the entire landscape ablaze. Nations are locked in a web of rivalries, territorial disputes, and strategic power plays, each one carrying the potential to tip global stability into chaos. In today's interconnected world, even a conflict in a small region can ripple outward, affecting trade, security, and economic confidence everywhere. Unlike in the past, where wars could be contained geographically, modern conflicts spill into cyberspace, financial systems, and energy markets almost instantly. Trade wars and economic sanctions have become tools of political leverage, but they come at a cost. Countries that once depended on each other for resources and goods now face shortages, inflated prices, and strained relationships. The supply of critical commodities, like oil, rare earth minerals, and food, can be disrupted overnight by a single blockade or political standoff. This instability doesn't just affect national governments, it impacts ordinary people who suddenly find their heating bills tripled or grocery store shelves empty. The military buildup in various hotspots is another looming danger. From the South China Sea to Eastern Europe and the Middle East, the concentration of military forces increases the risk of accidental confrontations. A single miscalculation, an aircraft straying too close to a border, a naval encounter escalating into gunfire, could trigger a chain reaction of retaliations. The presence of nuclear weapons in the arsenals of several major powers only raises the stakes, turning what might once have been a limited skirmish into a potential global catastrophe. Geopolitical rivalry has also expanded into the cyber realm. States, sponsored hacking, espionage, and disinformation campaigns are eroding trust between nations. Attacks on critical infrastructure, such as power grids, banking systems, and communication networks, could cripple a country without a single shot being fired. These invisible acts of aggression are harder to detect, attribute, and respond to, making them a dangerous tool in the hands of those who want to destabilize their rivals. All the while, alliances and treaties that once acted as guardrails for peace are fraying. International organizations designed to mediate disputes are struggling to keep pace with the speed and complexity of modern conflicts. As countries turn inward, prioritizing national security over global cooperation, the likelihood of resolving disputes peacefully diminishes. In a perfect storm, geopolitical tensions don't remain isolated. They intertwine with economic crises, resource scarcity, and social unrest. A war in one region can disrupt energy supplies, spark mass migration, and destabilize entire economies thousands of miles away. When these tensions escalate during times of already heightened global fragility, they can push the world toward a tipping point from which recovery may be long, costly, and uncertain. Mass migrations and refugee crises have become defining features of our era, and in the context of a perfect storm, they are both a symptom and a catalyst for further instability. When conflict, environmental disasters, or economic collapse strike, people have no choice but to leave their homes in search of safety and opportunity. These movements are rarely small or gradual. Instead, they often involve thousands, even millions, of people crossing borders in a short span of time. Such rapid population shifts put immense pressure on the countries receiving them, especially if those nations are already struggling with their own economic or political challenges. The reasons behind these migrations are often interconnected. A prolonged drought can destroy crops, leading to famine and unrest, which in turn fuels political instability or armed conflict. Likewise, economic collapse can strip away livelihoods, forcing families to flee in search of work or basic necessities. In many cases, these factors overlap, creating an unbreakable chain of displacement. For example, climate change can intensify natural disasters, which damage infrastructure, weaken economies, and inflame political tensions, all of which drive people from their homes. The arrival of large numbers of displaced people can strain resources such as housing, food, water, and health care in host communities. Governments may be forced to reallocate funds from other critical areas, leading to resentment among their own citizens. This tension can be exploited by extremist groups or political factions seeking to sow division, painting refugees as threats rather than victims in need of compassion. When societal divisions deepen, unrest and violence become more likely, creating a feedback loop of instability. Borders and immigration systems are also tested under these conditions. Nations may respond by tightening controls, building physical barriers, or deploying military forces to manage the flow of people. While these measures might slow migration, they often fail to address the root causes driving it, meaning the pressure only builds over time. Refugee camps, initially meant as temporary solutions, can become semi-permanent settlements where generations grow up without stable opportunities or adequate services, further perpetuating cycles of poverty and desperation. Mass migrations can also reshape geopolitics. Countries hosting large refugee populations may demand international aid or use the presence of refugees as leverage in diplomatic negotiations. Meanwhile, origin countries, often facing depopulation of certain regions, may see their economies weakened and their social structures fragmented. In the most extreme cases, migration pressures can spark conflicts between nations, either over border disputes or accusations of pushing displaced populations toward a neighbor. In a perfect storm scenario where multiple crises converge, mass migrations are not just a humanitarian challenge. They become a destabilizing force that reverberates through economies, politics, and societies. They test the resilience of nations, the compassion of communities, and the strength of international cooperation, all while serving as a stark reminder that when one part of the world collapses, the ripples are felt everywhere. The erosion of public trust in institutions is one of the most dangerous and destabilizing elements in a perfect storm scenario. When people no longer believe that their governments, media, financial systems, or health organizations are acting in their best interests, the social fabric begins to unravel. Trust is the invisible glue that holds societies together. Without it, even the most advanced and resource-rich nations can find themselves spiraling into chaos. This erosion rarely happens overnight. It often begins with a series of smaller betrayals or perceived failures. Government corruption scandals, mishandled crises, or repeated instances of misinformation being exposed. Over time, these events chip away at the credibility of leadership and institutions. In the digital age, this process accelerates dramatically as misinformation and conspiracy theories spread faster than official narratives can keep up. Once the public starts questioning everything, even truthful statements are met with skepticism. The breakdown of trust leads to a dangerous vacuum. Without confidence in central authorities, people turn inward, relying on smaller, localized networks of family, friends, or ideological groups. While these close-knit circles can provide some resilience, They also create fertile ground for echo chambers and radicalization. In such environments, fear and anger can be amplified, and cooperation between different segments of society becomes increasingly difficult. Economic instability often deepens the distrust. When banks fail, currencies lose value, or inflation erodes savings, the public sees these failures not as isolated events, but as proof that the systems they relied upon are flawed or rigged against them. Similarly, if public health agencies mishandle disease outbreaks or environmental disasters, confidence in expert guidance collapses. Without trusted voices, even life-saving measures can be rejected outright, leading to further harm. The danger is that distrust can quickly become self-perpetuating. Citizens who believe their leaders are corrupt or incompetent may refuse to follow laws or pay taxes, weakening the very systems that are meant to serve them. Governments feeling the loss of authority may respond with more force, censorship, or surveillance, which in turn confirms the public's fears and pushes them further away from cooperation. This cycle can transform democratic societies into fractured, unstable states where governance becomes nearly impossible. On the global stage, eroded trust undermines alliances and cooperation between nations. Treaties, trade agreements, and joint security measures depend on mutual belief in each other's commitments. If suspicion replaces trust, international relationships break down, leaving the world less prepared to handle collective crises like pandemics, climate change, or geopolitical conflicts. In the end, when trust in institutions collapses, society loses one of its most critical defenses against disaster. The perfect storm is no longer just a convergence of external crises. It becomes an internal collapse where the very bonds holding communities and nations together are dissolved from within.